All right, welcome back. So in the last lesson, we implemented this form and we got it to save new people to our database and got the web page reloading using a redirect, though, so that we could refresh all of the information on the page each time we add a new person. As you have noticed here, I've also decided to try changing the layout here to do a side-by-side instead of the top and bottom. This might work out a little better for us going forward. So now in this lesson, I want to clean up a couple of things and I want to show you an issue with our form and then we will fix that issue, okay? So I think the first thing we'll do is let's go ahead and get rid of the dummy data that we're loading into the database and just clear that out since we now have a way to put real data, or at least more real data, into the program, okay? So let's jump over to the person or people data loader. I can't remember what I named it. Person data loader, that's it. Yeah, so there are a few ways that we could clear this guy out. I think what we may do though is simply comment out the @component annotation. That will cause this class to never even be loaded by Spring when the application is restarted. Okay, so that's one way that we can do this. So let's restart. And let's try that out. Now we may need to fully restart the application. Oh no, well, I guess we don't need to. Okay, so there we go. Got everything going. Now, first thing you may notice here is the fact that our table renders kind of weird now because there's no data there. I don't like that. I would like at least to have some indication that, hey, here's a table with no data. And we can do that pretty easily. So we'll jump back over to the people.html file here. And what we can do is we can render one conditional row that only shows up when we don't have any data. And that row can basically say something like no data. You know, something along those lines, okay? So the way we can do that is right here, I'm in the table element here, and then there's the header, right? The heading for the table, and now we're in the body. Technically, these rows should be indented inside of that body, but I guess I won't bother with that right now. All right, so we'll put another table row in here, like so. Okay, so there's our table row, and then we'll want to have a table data cell. Okay, that's what the TD is for. And then we'll say no data, okay? Now let's just see what that looks like by itself first. All right, so that doesn't look very good because it's just taking up one column out of all the columns that should be here. Now, if we don't want to add a bunch of dummy columns to this one row, and we don't need to do that, we can specify how many columns this table data element should span, okay? So we can tell it to kind of take up more columns. So the way to do that is with a call span equals, and then the number of columns that we want it to span. So in this case, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns. So I will put 6 in there and let's see what this looks like. All right, so that's a little bit better, but I wouldn't mind if this were centered maybe. So we can do that too. We can get that centered. What we can do is use a class and then text, center. All right, there we go. That's a little bit better, but I think we can improve a little bit further. Now, this text center, by the way, that comes from the Bootstrap framework, okay? That's a style that's coming from Bootstrap. Now, what I think we want to do now, let's see what this table would look like if we put a border around everything, because as you can see, the table is kind of just bleeding right into the form and all of that, and it's a little confusing looking. So if we jump over here to the Bootstrap documentation, we can do all kinds of things. And let me see here. I'm just going to search for border. Table borders. There we go. Whoop, that went in the wrong direction. There we go. So let's see here. Border. Yeah, so we can do all kinds of things. So we'll start off with just a table bordered. Okay, that's the class that we will use, table bordered. Okay, so let's try that. So jump back over here. All right, so yeah, we'll throw that in here. Now that will go on the table, table element itself in its class. So we'll put a table bordered right there, and let's refresh and see what that does for us. Okay, so it's kind of subtle, kind of subtle. Let's see what other options we have there, by the way. Let's see. So we can play with colors and a few things there. Now here's one also to make the table smaller, and I wouldn't mind doing that, particularly because we're now displaying in this more scrunched up view. Table small. Okay, yeah, so that made things just a little bit more compact, and I do kind of like the look of that. All right, so that's looking okay, looking a little better, I guess. So now let me show you another potential issue that we're going to have, though. So let's go ahead and just put a person in here. So we'll do person 1, Smith, 1/1/2000, and P Smith at people.com and $1,000 and hit enter. Okay, so there's that person. Now notice what's happening here. The no data row did not go away. We don't want that. We want it so that if there is actual real data in here, then you won't see the no data thing. You'll only see the no data thing if there is no data here. So how can we do that? Well, what we can do is come back over here to our no data row. Whoops, where did it go? There it is. There's our no data row. Okay, so we can use an attribute from Thymeleaf to conditionally render this row. Okay, and what that will look like is th:\if. So it's an if statement, which you are familiar with. And then we'll use a $sign and 2 curly braces so that we can interpret some code, basically. That lets you interpret code when you put this $sign and curly braces. In fact, there's a few variations. We already saw the star, the asterisk curly brace, and now we're doing another $sign curly brace, kind of like what we did down here, in fact. Oh, and that reminds me of something else. I duplicated a few of these table cells, and we got the double braces there, and it's not really hurting anything, but we didn't explicitly need them for most of these fields. We really only needed it for the date of birth, right? In fact, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and just fix that real quick. Oh, well, actually, we do want it for the salary also, though. So it's really just the email field that we don't want that on. Okay, so we'll restart that in a minute. Anyway, back up here. Yeah, so this if here. Now, what we can do is Thymeleaf actually here. Let's open up the documentation so that you'll know where I'm finding this stuff, and then you'll be able to find it yourself, because obviously I'm not showing you everything here. So we'll go back to the Thymeleaf documentation, documents, and let's see, read online. And let's see, so we've got functions. We've got functions that are kind of down at the bottom, if I recall correctly. Yeah, there we go, lists. Okay, so we've got functions here, and one of our functions is empty. So what do you think we're going to do with that? We're going to come over here, and we're going to copy some of what that says, lists.isEmpty, and then we're going to point it at a list. And we have a list. We have a list of people, right? And because that's where we're getting the people, it's this list right here. This variable that's in our model is people. So we can refer to that up here and test whether or not that collection is empty. And if it is empty, then we will render this row. And if it isn't empty, then it will not render. That's what we're trying to do here, okay? Does that make sense? So we're saying if the people object, which is an iterable, if that thing is empty, then render this whole entire row with its children. Otherwise, don't render it, okay? So let's see if that works. So we'll restart. Now, I lost my data, though, so let me put that data back in now. Person 1, Smith, whoops, 01/01/2000, P. Smith, there we go, at people and 1,000. There we go. So now we've got that person, and our no data row disappeared. Okay, and that's what we wanted. So that's working nicely now. Now you may be wondering, how come our data disappeared when I restarted? And because we are using a database, but we're using an in-memory database, okay? And because we're using an in-memory database, it actually loses its data every time the Java process restarts. Now, we can go ahead and address that now and configure Spring Boot and the H2 database sitting underneath this application to not be an in-memory database and actually retain our data, okay? This is, again, just the default behavior that you get from Spring Boot if you don't configure anything at all. And honestly, it just makes the process of getting something up and going quickly really nice, because it can often be a little bit of a pain in the butt to have to go stop and look up, okay, what's the URL string for a database and where do I want to put it and all that. You don't want to take time to think about all of that all the time, like right from the start. You kind of want to just get some good stuff going first and then come back later maybe and think about all those boring parts, right? But now we're at the little boring part, but it won't be too boring. All right, so how do we do this? Well, we will go to the application.properties file, which we can come over here. So there it is. So application.properties file, this is the main place where you do a lot of the configuring of your Spring Boot applications, okay? And there is an alternative also that we could use. There's application.properties, or we could rename this file to application.yaml, YML, and that would give us a different format, a hierarchical format, which usually I do prefer, but I'm going to leave it at properties for right now because that's a little bit of a simpler format. Okay, so I'm going to open that file up, and then I'm going to close that to give us some space here. And now let me also jump over to the documentation for Spring so that you can see what our options are here. So, So let's see, we'll go to docs.spring.io and come up here and jump to the projects and Spring Boot, learn, reference documentation, and let's see here, application properties. All right, so here's a list of some of the properties that we can play with. All right, and then from here, I would probably just start searching, and I kind of vaguely know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something about a URL property, and so I would probably just keep hitting enter a few times until I started to zero in on it. And now I'm getting close right here. Spring.data source Jdbc2. Now that's not quite what I want, but I'm getting close. Let's see here. So now I happen to already know what I'm looking for, but I'm kind of showing you some ways that you could find properties without having to like memorize every single property that there is. And I see what I want right here. It's spring.datasource.url. So then I can come over, I could have copied that, but I'll just type it in. So I'm going to set spring.datasource.url equals, this is how you use a properties file, equals, and Jdbc. Now this will be the Jdbc URL or a Jdbc URL, just like what we did in the database section where we had to, point at a file or whatever. So I'm just going to make up something here similar to what we did before. So Jdbc H2 tilde, and that tilde means my home directory. That's just where I choose to put this file that we're going to refer to. And let's see, this project is called peopledb-web. So I'm going to call the database that as well. Okay. Now you can call yours whatever you want, and you can put yours wherever you like as well, but that's where I'm going to put mine for now. And while we're at it, let me introduce you to a few more properties as well. So we can make it so that Spring Data and the underlying technology that's really doing all the heavy lifting of talking to the database and everything, which is called Hibernate, we can tell those tools to show us the SQL that they are generating, because these tools are really Hibernate is generating SQL for us. And so maybe we want to see that SQL. Sometimes it can be helpful to help troubleshoot what's going on with the tool, although we're doing really simplistic things right now, but we can turn that on. By default, it's not turned on. So to do that, we can come over here and let's see here if I can find that option for you very quickly. So usually it refers to show, there it is, show SQL right there. And I'm just going to copy it that way. All right, so yeah, we want to show the SQL. All right, so let's see how this all goes with these two options here, okay? So let's see, I'll pull up the, pull that up, and let's switch back over here and then reload. Okay, so we got an issue here. What is the issue? It is telling me failed to bind properties under Spring JPA show SQL to boot. Oh, sorry, I didn't finish setting this. I needed to set that to true. There we go. Okay, so that's one issue. Let's try that again. All right, so now it has blown up. And let's see what error we're getting here. Something about the grammar could not prepare a statement. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of eyeballing quickly, looking for a message that kind of jumps out at me, so I don't have to like sit here and look at every single line. Like this looks kind of interesting. I see some SQL here. Table person not found. Okay, so what has happened here? Well, first off, let me explain. So a SQL select statement was attempted to be executed against the database. And we can actually see that statement here. Now, it's not going to look pretty like ours did because this is all being generated by machine, right? And so machines don't need everything to be very pretty. So anyway, here's the SQL that it generated. And that SQL tried to execute against the person table. There's the reference to that table right there. And we're getting a Jdbc SQL syntax error saying that there is no table called person. Now, why are we getting this now, but we weren't getting it before? Well, the issue is this. Once we decided to kind of take over some of the settings of the database configuration from Spring Boot and Spring Data, well, then Spring kind of said, oh, okay, you're going to take it over? Well, then you take it over. So now we do have to specify a few of those settings that we were kind of getting some defaults for before, okay? So yeah, once you start to kind of do your own thing, then Spring says, let me get out of your way and let you do your own thing. Now, don't worry, we don't have to do much, but we do have to do a couple extra lines here, okay? So in addition to specifying that we want to connect to this database at this location here, we do have to tell Spring and JPA, which ends up being Hibernate really, that we want it to generate the DDL for us, okay? And so we can do that too. And here, let's just jump back over here and let me show you. So I'm going to just search for DDL. Let's see, I'll search a couple times until there we go. Spring JPA generate DDL and Spring JPA hibernate DDL-auto. So let's see what those options do. Whether to initialize the schema on startup, yes, we do want that. And DDL mode, this is actually a shortcut for the hibernate HBM2 DDL.auto property defaults to create drops. So, okay, so first off, let me copy that line there and paste that, and my options are true or false, I believe. Yeah, so the default, I guess, is false. So we'll set that to true. And then the other option here was this DDL autos. All right, so this option refers to how Hibernate should treat the database if there are already tables in it or if there aren't, okay? And I'm not gonna get into all of the details, but I will tell you that for our purposes for now, first off, let me just copy that and put that right there. And I'm going to paste it. And for now, I think we will just use the option of update. So real quick, what this is going to do is, as I've already explained, when we tell Hibernate or JPA to execute the DDL, and again, DDL just means the SQL commands that create structures like tables and primary keys and indexes and things like that, okay? So when we tell JPA to generate the DDL for us, it does that based on whatever we have coded in our domain model classes, which specifically are entities. So those classes that we have annotated as an entity, okay? It looks at those and then it says, oh, here's a class called person, which is an entity, which has an ID and a first name and blah, blah, blah. And then it translates all of those things into tables and columns, okay? What if a table and column are already there in the database though? How should it behave then? So this option tells it how it should behave if there are already tables there or not. And in this case, it's saying, If there's already a table there, but it's different from what our Java code says, then update it. But otherwise, just leave it alone, okay? So that's basically what this is doing. All right, so I think that's all we need. So let's restart this. There we go. Okay, now we lost all of our data, but we shouldn't lose data ever again unless we want to. So let's put another person in here. Person 1, Smith, 1/1/2000, P1 Smith at people.com and $1,000. All right, so there's person 1. Now let's put one more in here. Person 2 Smith, 2002, and this will be P2 Smith at people.com for 2,000. All right, so now let's restart and see what happens. Yep, good. So our data remains. In fact, you know what? Let's even just stop the entire application and restart it. Okay, so there it is. And then we'll refresh. There we go. And now, if you look down here, do you see that? Select person.person0 ID as ID10, person0.dob.email as email, first name as first NA4, blah, 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 last name. So you see that? It looks kind of like the Bizarro computer version of the queries that we were building, where we were using the column aliases and all of that. It's pretty much the same stuff that we would have done, except it's just generating weird names for things because it's a computer. And that's what computers tend to do, right? From person, and then it even aliases the person table there. So that's what Hibernate, and that's the underlying tool that's really talking to the database, is doing. So we can understand what that's doing, right? And so that is querying all of that data back from the database. Now, there's more stuff that I want to do, but I don't think I'm going to be able to squeeze everything that I want to do into this lesson. So I'm going to leave some of the remaining big things for the next lesson. But there are a few smaller things that we might be able to address real quick here before we close out. And I've got one cosmetic thing that I'm not too crazy about. And that is, I don't like the fact that this table is right up at the very top edge of the entire page. I would like to have a bit of margin there. So let me show you how we can do that. So if we jump back over to Bootstrap, and we can search for margin, spacing, margin, and padding. All right, and so this will just kind of give us a little bit of an idea, or a key really, of what our options are for margin. So margin is the space that you can have around the elements in an HTML page, okay? And again, I don't have time to get into everything, but if you imagine that almost every element in HTML, especially container type elements like divs and tables and things like that, if you imagine that all of those are really just squares and rectangles, and that those squares and rectangles can have some spacing on the outside of the square and some spacing on the inside of the square, okay? If you just imagine that, the outside space, the space outside of the square is called margin, and then the space inside of the square, between the square itself and whatever contents are in it, that space would be called padding, okay? So you now know a whole lot about CSS. So anyway, we can specify the margin for our table. And let's see here. So the way we can do that is that they have these codes. So M stands for margin, P stands for padding, and then we can specify top margin or bottom margin, things like that, and then a size. So MT 0 or whatever. And so here are some examples: MT0, MS1. Let's see. So the S there would stand for the start. Okay. So I want some space at the top. So that would be margin at the top. So MT and then a number to represent how much margin I want there. Okay. So let's try that out. So let's jump back over to here. And let's close that down. And then let's see, now where do we want to put this? I don't know that it matters a whole lot. I guess we can try putting it on the div itself. So MT dash, let's try 2. and see what that does. All right, that did a very tiny bit. So let's do more. Let's see 8, and I don't remember what the limit is. Okay, so I think I hit the limit right there because it went away. So let's do MT9. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant MT7. MT7. Oh, you know what? I think I do know the limit. I think it's 5, if I'm not mistaken. Let's try MT5. There we go. Yeah, so that's a little better. All right. So you can go read up on all of that because I don't remember exactly what those limits were on the number there. But anyway, you get the point. So now one thing that you may notice is that now that I've made the browser window a lot narrower than it was before, everything is looking a little too scrunched up. So with this smaller width, I would probably prefer that the contents here would take up more space left and right, or have less margin here, you know, on the left and the right. But that's only like when the window is this size, okay? So I would like my contents here to be a little more responsive. That meaning to respond to the width that I have here, okay? And Bootstrap makes that relatively easy to do. So currently with the column 8, that looks okay when this window is this wide, right? That looks okay. But when it's this size, that's too much margin. So we can actually modify that. And let me show you how. So you can come over here to the Bootstrap documentation, and we can specify the column widths and things with optional breakpoint sizes, if you will. So we could say something like, when the window is big, use 8 columns, but when it's medium, use X number of columns. And when it's small, use a different number of columns, right? We can do something like that. So let's play around with that and see what happens here. So our options are small, medium, and large. So we've got options like small, medium, and large, okay? So let's see. So if we come back over here, let's try some things out. And I'm just going to experiment a little bit here. So let's say column, let's see, small and 10. Let's see what that does. Okay, yeah, so look at that, right? So apparently this window does satisfy the criterion for small, okay? And that's just saying, like, if the window width is small, and I don't recall how many pixels that is, but if it's small, then use 10 columns instead of 8 columns, okay? So in fact, let's even play around with this a little bit more. So if I set that to 12, I shouldn't like that if it does what I think it's going to do. Yeah, okay, so 12 takes up the whole entire width because, like I said, Bootstrap is based on the concept of 12 equally spaced columns to take up all the width of your page, okay? So that's what you get there. Now let's see what whoops. So obviously we don't want that, but let's also see what happens now if I pull this all the way out. Okay, look at that. Now that doesn't revert back. And so we can see that if we want this to behave differently at these different sizes, I now need to be a little more explicit with this first rule here, okay? So I'm gonna put maybe like an MD for medium, okay? And let me refresh. Okay, so now if I pull this out, look at that. See, I just hit the breakpoint for medium. So that breakpoint is somewhere in here, okay? So I'm going from, this is small, okay? So the rule for small is when the window is whatever the small size is, then take up all of the columns, all 12 columns, and then when we switch over into whatever the size is for medium, then only use 8 of the 12 columns, okay? And that's what's happening there, okay? So that's kind of cool. So anyway, we know we don't want 12 though. Let's do 10, I think. Was that what I had before? Okay, so yeah, that looks a little better. And then when we, whoops, and then when we break beyond that, yeah, we have a wider margin, all right? And so yeah, that looks a little better to me. So you can play with that however you like. But that's a little small introduction to the responsiveness of the Bootstrap framework also. All right, and then one more thing I think we'll try is let's put some titles for the table and for the form and see if that helps to kind of break up things a little bit more. So right above this table here, let's put a heading, an H2 maybe heading, and we'll call this, I don't know, people list perhaps. And then right above the form, let's see what happens if we put another H2 here and person form, I don't know. And let's refresh that. Okay, yeah, that kind of helps a little bit, I think, to break things up a bit. We might play around with this some more. Oh yeah, and I see one other issue here. I'd like to have some margin at the bottom also. So let's see here, margin. So I did a margin at the top, but if I want a margin at the top and the bottom, I think I can just do an MY, Y meaning Y-axis, up and bottom, or up, top and bottom. So let's see what that does. Okay, yeah, there we go. So now I got a little more space there at the bottom. Okay, now I could have done that separately. I could have done an MT-5 and an MB-3 or something like that. I could have specified separately for each of those settings, but this is fine. Okay, cool. I think that's enough for right now. All right, so in the next lesson, we're going to do something I think will be pretty cool. I don't want to even give it away, so just join me in the next one and you'll see. See you in the next one. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to help me out, there are several ways you could do that. First, you can always click the like and subscribe. That'll help me out a lot. Additionally, another way you can help me out is to check the link in the description below. That'll link you to my website where you can find additional courses. And finally, for those of you who might be interested in starting a new career as a professional software developer, I offer a free PDF guide that will detail exactly how you can get started in this field with no college degree and no prior experience. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.